Hey, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and as I've mentioned in the past, story is a pretty big part of what I like about games. That might sound crazy to the gameplay is king crowd, and I do generally agree that that is the most important part of any game, yet I'd still say that a title's narrative can have a profound impact on how it affects you, both good and bad. Maybe that's obvious, maybe some are still saying that they don't need to know what kind of guy Mario is and what kind of life he's lived in order to jump high. So why not look at what role writing plays in a game, and if it's ever enough to save or tank an experience. Story, in the lightest sense, can be used just to provide context to a scenario. Why is Donkey Kong laying the smackdown on Kremlings? Because they stole his bananas. Why are there another 8 Robot Masters to fight? Because Wily's at it again. Why is Little Mac jumping into the ring? Because he aims to become the champion. That last one is so minimal that it can barely be called a story, yet even a single sentence is still something. But do games actually need a plot? In some cases, no. Trying to give Tetraminos a reason to exist would be pretty convoluted, and if I'm being honest, if there's a reason behind why humans are battling with birds in Balloon Fight, it's beyond me. Yet, for the most part, I'd say you at least need something to kind of explain why things are happening, even if it is flimsy. If you just have characters doing things, people are gonna question why, and if you don't have an answer, they're likely to fill in the blanks themselves. Even if there are some Nintendo games where things happen that I don't really understand why, I still imagine that I could dig up what's going on in Balloon Fight or Clu Clu Land. And if you do skip on that, well, not only will it look kinda lazy and ill-conceived, but people will just make up their own reasons. For instance, Mega Man. Already mentioned how every game is just Dr. Wily rehashing his formula, but there's a lot left undefined. Where does he get the resources for his plots? What are each of the Robot Masters like? How the heck does he get away at the end of Mega Man 1? And that's the sort of stuff that different adaptations and fan theories address. Some stuff even gets accepted as canon because if Capcom never makes it official and it's a widely believed trope, who's gonna argue? Don't think there's anything in-game that hints at Bubble Man having an inferiority complex, due in part to Bubbles being seen as more cute than threatening, yet I've seen it pop up quite a bit. No pun intended. So to expand on that a bit further, people can draw their own conclusions about a character just based on their design, area, movements, or even just their name. I guess what I'm saying is, in most cases, it's hard to avoid story taking place, whether you intend it or not. Unless it's just a bunch of falling blocks. And sometimes even then. But how exactly important is it? If all a story does in a lot of cases is just explain away what's happening, no deeper meaning other than to assure you that the director didn't just get really high one night and dream about a blue hedgehog fighting a rotund man over some comically large jewels, does it really matter? And again, I'd say yes. Mega Man has 7 main series, and the ones that get clamored after the most for new entries are X and Legends, the 2 that left off on cliffhangers. And sure, X is pretty dope, I'd want more of those regardless, but with the quality flagging a good bit after X4, I might actually be better served playing another platformer or just revisiting the first Legacy collection. Likewise, I love Legends, but those games do not control well. Yet I'm invested in how they're going to get Mega Man Volnut off the moon, and what'll happen to poor Axel over on the X side. Plenty of indie titles and fan projects fill a hole left by certain defunct series, and in some instances to great acclaim, but none of these will ever completely fill that gap, no matter how good they are, simply because we're invested in the characters and lore of the official installments, and those are the few things that they can never deliver on. Sometimes even the proper entries screw this up. While there's a few resets I could mention, I always think about Shantae Half Genie Hero. Shantae had a few titles previously, gradually establishing the world, but in Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, they really stepped things up, fleshing out the characters' backgrounds and hinting at some pretty major bombshells to come. And then, nothing. Half Genie Hero just kinda plows ahead, addressing none of these. Worse yet, adding insult to injury, you can even talk to an NPC that comments on the dubious nature of the title, saying about how no one really knows whether the game is a sequel, a reboot, or what. Way forward, you can't do that. You can't get me all gassed up, reading in between the lines and waiting to see where things go, just to say, you know what? Never mind. So yeah, while the level of investment will vary from person to person, I'd say it's pretty important. Putting closure aside, can the plot ever ruin the actual game? That's a little tricky to answer. There are some games that get really stupid when you actually try too hard to break things down, like Mario. Remember when there was that theory going around that Mario was actually killing all the denizens of the Mushroom Kingdom due to some line about them all being turned into blocks? Likewise, why do a bunch of clearly carnivorous lizard people need bananas? And I'm not completely sure that they understood the difference between physical and digital, or how computers actually work when making Battle Network. A lot of things we're not really supposed to question and just kind of roll with. For a more serious example though, there's Metroid Other M. The game has a lot of issues, it having dumb motion controls and some pretty questionable sequences, yet I swear the complaint I hear most often is the story. The main gripe is that they took a total badass of a character, Samus Aran, and made her not only take orders from a man, but also have her show weakness, as she confronts a source of trauma that in every other outing she shot down, no hesitation. And she also pops into the Zero suit, just kinda because at points. All while the game beats you over the head with mother metaphors. Just look at the game's initials. Some of these feel more fair than others. Like, I think that having restrictions put on her abilities are a unique way to handle the whole power reset she typically goes through. Having her obey someone who she's assisting as part of a rescue mission makes sense, since just using power bombs willy-nilly could result in civilian death, but it all kinda falls apart when she's not allowed to use the suit function that makes her not melt in extreme heat until someone gives the okay. There's also the whole traitor subplot that they play up that either ends with you finding a corpse and saying, "Oh, Brad? I should've known, Brad was a dick." Or it was just plain forgettable if it was something else. Regardless, people were not happy with them taking the unflinching, stoic badass and reducing her to an emotional woman who needed permission just to take a tinkle. Perhaps giving a female icon of gaming to a developer who's pretty famous for making women characters known mostly for TNA wasn't such a good idea. And maybe, given how many other problems it had, I shouldn't use it as an example for narrative ruining a game, but it's also worth mentioning that people actually got pretty mad when Metroid Dread pretty much confirmed that Other M was canon, while snubbing Prime. If just the gameplay were contentious, who would've cared? But for a more potent example, there's Fire Emblem Engage. The writing in this one is poo-poo! The story reading like fanfic where not only does everyone who isn't a stinky evil guy immediately love you, Fire Emblem characters from past games show up to be your super best friends! A lot of the plot is predictable, they try to make the villains sympathetic, despite them laughing while committing magical war crimes, the premise for some of the missions doesn't match up with the actual execution, and just about every character isn't actually a character so much as a trope or single personality trait, all while localization changes dilute things even further. At the same time though, Emblems add a lot of neat mechanics, there's some new classes and abilities that are fun to mess with, you get a training chamber so that you can build up units that you failed to keep up with, and there's some pretty good maps thrown in. This leads to it being, in my opinion, the worst Fire Emblem game I played in terms of story, but maybe the best when it comes to gameplay? And that makes it really hard to rate. On one hand, gameplay is number one, so me having so much stuff to mess around with and see how many degenerate strategies I can come up with that shouldn't work, but do, is a big plus. On the other hand, story is one of the main reasons I play Fire Emblem and RPGs in general. You get attached to units and will bend over backwards to help them grow and survive, regardless of how they rank in the tiers. Having them reduced to inferiority complex archer or nice girl who uses magic is depressing. And trying to convince me that the mass-murdering psychopath has redeemed herself just because she had a bad childhood and died doing one good thing actually kinda ticks me off, like you're insulting my intelligence. But still, I am having a really good time when I'm moving around units on the battlefield. So does this ruin the game for me? Is Engage the best Fire Emblem game? Or the worst? Don't have an answer for that, but it's certainly not my favorite. Though had the scribes brought their A game, it might have been. In the worst case scenario, story can be a gatekeeper. While I'm not really a fan of Final Fantasy, or a big Disney guy, I do like RPGs. So while I wouldn't go out of my way to play Kingdom Hearts, I could see myself getting into it if the right person asked. Yet every time I hear its plot discussed, it's so convoluted that it sounds like it has to be a joke. A lot of times, it is framed for laughs, but whenever I go down to the comments, they assure me that it's accurate. My general understanding is that not only is it hard to follow, but everything, even the mobile game, is canon, and elements of each will come into play. I've even made the joke that Sora's appearance in Smash will be vitally important at some point. And I don't have the patience for that. Making it one of the few series that I vow I will never touch, even at gunpoint. If that happens to tick off any of you Mickey Mouse loyalists, don't worry, I'm coming for my precious next. Mega Man Zero is one of the Blue Bomber series that's praised for having one of, if not the best plots, and is a favorite of mine as well. Yet this is also one of the elements that makes it hardest to recommend. Pretty much any other part of the franchise, you can just kinda start wherever you want. Even Battle Network, which does have a full-fledged storyline and probably the most text of any of them, you can still kinda just pick and choose. Each title does a good job of getting you up to speed. Zero, though, is definitely meant to be played in order, and if you don't, you're gonna have some questions. Unfortunately, this is also paired with a really rough start, 0-1 having first game syndrome, and it just feeling like Inti Creates was fiddling around with the formula until they perfected it with 0-3. So while I wish I could just tell someone to start with 3 and decide how much of the series they want to play based on that, I really can't. Who the heck is Copy X? Why are there only 3 for Guardians? What's an El Piso? I could tell you to look up a plot summary, but then if you do wind up going back, you pretty much spoiled the game for yourself. And you know what? That's not great! On top of that, while you can just play the series and understand things for the most part, there's also some information only told through drama CDs, exclusive to Japan. If you want to know everything, you really need to do your homework, which is true for a lot of games. Lore and theory channels are popular for a reason. There's just extra hoops here, and 1 or 2 pretty important plot points thrown in, which is another way Mega Man Zero kinda fails when it comes to storytelling. Hardcore gamers / researchers only. In the reverse, you can also have a bad game ruin an otherwise okay plot. In my opinion, most 3D Sonic games have pretty silly stories. Each one takes itself way too seriously for a title about a little cartoon hedgehog, and yet, you buy into it. Sonic Adventure 2 has Shadow popping out of a cryosleep, offering to grant Eggman a wish like a genie if he just gathers the 7 Chaos Emeralds. All because he forgot that a super nice person he was best friends with wanted kindness rather than genocide. But the game is so fun that you just kinda go with it. When I was watching the 3rd Sonic movie and they had Shadow surrounded by a bunch of guys with guns, I didn't think, this is stupid. I thought, man, I wonder if he's gonna kill them or just beat them up. Because that's how in deep I am. Contrast that with Sonic 06, where I'd argue that they put more into the plot, yet it's more often made fun of. The game sucks though, so it's a bit easier to mock. Yet, if 06 played as well as intended and wasn't bogged down by hardware limitations, also exceedingly long levels, you'd all think it was dope as hell. I bet people wouldn't even make fun of the kissing a human lady thing. They'd just say that Sonic had the riz to pull whoever he wants. Or doesn't want. Hard to give consent when you're dead. Bad games can also torpedo individual characters, in what I shall now dub the Silver effect. Silver was in a bad game and that kind of earned him a reputation for a while. While the character certainly ain't perfect, I think the majority of the hate just came from him being in 06. Likewise, Axel isn't exactly the most popular Mega Man character. He was introduced in X7, which is considered a low point in the franchise, and again, there's certainly some stuff that you can criticize him for, but he did add some interesting gameplay elements and story beats. He's actually my preferred way to play X7, so if you removed him from the context of the game, I think he's pretty neat. Yet because of when he was introduced, like Silver, I think it gets a lot more disdain than is really warranted. Of course, another phenomena typically occurs in these sorts of scenarios, where the excessive hate and underdog appeal earns them a bunch of fans just to counter the naysayers, but that just makes it hard to judge their actual appeal and popularity. If Axel had shown up in X4, would he have been beloved or ignored due to not being X or Zero? So while story can sour an otherwise fine experience, the opposite can also be true. To swing things back around, can story ever salvage a game? And if you'll allow me the easy way out, I'd say that it can depend a good deal on the genre. If a new platformer comes out that has a life-changing tale, spanning generations with characters that feel like flesh and blood people, that brings a tear to my eye and teaches me something about life and an important truth about myself, but the gameplay feels like I'm dragging myself through a field of glass on my one functioning but still broken limb, I'm gonna hate it. I'd rather just watch someone else's playthrough, or maybe just one of those cutscene compilation videos. Typically billed video game, the movie, which the narrative might have been better suited for. Conversely though, when it comes to visual novels, I'd say the story likely will be the make or break. A few of those can have some pretty unfun or frustrating gameplay, but for the most part, you're there for the story, so that's going to be the most important thing. What Ace Attorney titles stand out the most for me? The ones with the best characters, with the mysteries that I felt clever for solving, with plotlines that all felt unconnected, only to be tied together in the final chapter where you find out that all the cases were actually the same one, with the biggest and most shocking twist. Which Danganronpa is the only one I hate? The third one. Then there's Doki Doki Literature Club, a title that barely has anything that can be called gameplay, yet it stuck with me and remains a favorite just because of the narrative. And as discussed, writing also plays a huge part in RPGs. While I won't go so far as to say that it can redeem a poorly balanced or unfairly hard experience, it can cement a favorite. My favorite Pokemon games are Generation 7, Sun and Moon, yet I'm not big on Z moves, and even in the entries I hate, I can still find plenty of Pokemon that I love, so those can't be the reasons. There might be a few mechanics I like in it, yet I think more than anything, it's the story that gets me. It does more than just simply have you beat 8 gyms while foiling an evil team. It swaps up the formula a good bit, with traveling companions you spend a lot of time alongside, and a box legendary you build a relationship with. It has a villain that actually ticked me off enough that I wanted to stomp her, rather than just beat her as a mere formality, and even a twist that I didn't see coming. I love Alola, but if it had just been another iteration of what I've been doing since Generation 1, it probably would have just been another decently good time. To sum up my general thoughts, for the most part, I think a good story can enhance or dull a game. A good one's just gonna be a good one, and a bad one, well, you should probably just bail and watch someone else's playthrough if you're still invested in how things work out. There are the exceptions, of course, certain genres placing a greater importance, generating a greater expectation in turn on the subject, and as I've said, I'm still sorting out my feelings on Engage. Of course, unless you're the type to just skip all the cutscenes and dialogue, most games will have at least some sort of narrative or premise attached, so shouldn't you want it to be good, or at least passable if you're gonna experience it anyway? Beyond just the content, execution can also play a big role in what's acceptable, which I have some additional thoughts on, but this video is long enough already, so let me ask you, how important is narrative in games? Has it ever sunk or salvaged one for you? And what are your favorite plotlines from what you played? If I don't read your comment all that thoroughly, it's because I haven't played your answer yet, but plan to. With that, thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into retro games, especially Mega Man. The baby.